I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. How super duper will Tuesday really turn out to be? Welcome to Perino on Politics, where we give you everything you need to know from a 30,000-foot view of this week in politics. Joining me to discuss the delegates at stake and what each candidate is doing to secure votes is assistant editor of the Wall Street Journal editorial page and Fox News contributor James Freeman, and somebody who is a good friend, and I love your take on so many things. So
thank you.
I want to start. I do want to talk about Super Tuesday, even though it's a little bit of a foregone conclusion. So let me set that aside for a moment and talk about the news from the weekend that I thought was the most significant, which is President Biden's continued woes when it comes to his approval ratings. The New York Times Siena poll that came out late Saturday was abysmal for him. And the Fox News poll wasn't great. The AP poll wasn't great. And it reminded me of about 6 months ago. The Washington Post ABC poll was disavowed by their own pollsters because it had Trump so much higher than Biden in a hypothetical matchup. And they said, obviously, this is an outlier, and obviously, this isn't true. Yeah. And instead of it being a canary in the coal mine as a warning to the Biden team that you've got a real problem here, they've ignored it. They've had their head in the sands. They've continued to do things that hurt them on the issues of the economy, immigration, crime, etc. So tell me what you took away from that New York Times poll.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's been so much talk and coverage of the drama of within the Republican Party. Will Nikki Haley's voters be with Trump in the fall? Can he bring this coalition together? But it's really more of an issue in the Democratic Party in terms of the warnings that have been ignored. That was a great point about the Washington Post, really bizarre, calling their own poll an outlier. And it was, but that might have also been a scoop. And it's looking more like the latter, as you say, as the polls kind of move in the direction. But there have been a lot of them over the last several years. Republicans, Democrats, independents saying they don't think the president has the mental sharpness to do this job.
It's something like 86% of those polled consistently over all the polls think President Biden is too old.
Yeah.
And you know, the most bipartisan issue on the planet is time. We all get the same amount of it. We all age at a different rate. And people are judging this with their own eyes and ears. And I cannot tell you how many stories I have read from the New York Times that have aides to President Biden quoted saying, "You would not believe how vigorous he is, and we can't keep up with him at the White House, and he asks the most difficult questions, and he's on top of everything." And, okay, so if that's true, and I'm sure that he is probably better off camera than on camera. I worked for a president. I know that that's true.
Yeah.
But come on. And I don't think you should insult the voters, but meet them where they are.
Yeah, and I think if it's the age, and it seems to be, he's obviously got some cognitive challenges. You assume it's the age. I'm not a doctor. You would like for there to be a cognitive test just to inform well,
apparently he had one, right? That happened last week, too, when I was away. He had his physical.
Well, he had his physical.
And they said he didn't need to take a cognitive test.
And they had a whole lot of detail on, so his dental work worked out fine. Mm-hmm. Dentistry is fine. His feet, it had all kinds of issues that voters are not really that interested in, and it kind of skated past the big one that everyone wants to know. Now, it did say that neurologists were part of the team, and in their professional opinion.
Okay. Yep.
But it's a little odd because there is this test, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, that everyone in that industry,
I think, mom and dad have to take it. My mom and dad have to take it.
I think it's kind of known, and maybe I'm not going to say that can be the only test, but you have kind of a standard way for looking at this question.
Remember when President Trump did it and the media made so much of it because he was like person, microphone, podcast, cup, whatever, and he was like, yeah, that's what you do. You take the test, and he does it. But beyond just the fact that 86% think he's too old, it was on the issues that he's really behind. Yeah. Immigration is now the number one issue. The economy obviously continues to be a big factor. Crime, a factor. And just wrong track, right track, polling.
Yeah.
65% think the country's on the wrong track. So where do you think President Biden is in position to, how is his position going into re-election? And let me just add that President Trump just now won in the Supreme Court, where Colorado, Illinois, Maine tried to say he's not allowed to be on the ballot because he was part of an insurrection. The Supreme Court unanimously said, actually, no, states, you're not allowed to unilaterally do that. So he will be on the ballot. And I just feel like there's so many times that President Biden is being pulled left by weak arguments that have put him in a very vulnerable position.
Yeah, I think he is losing the policy because he made a decision, I think, out of concern that he wouldn't be able to get elected in 2020 after he beat Bernie Sanders in the primaries. And we're about to have Super Tuesday. Super Tuesday, last time around, voters in the Democratic Party made it very clear they did not want radical Marxism to be the standard for the Democratic Party. So they rejected Bernie Sanders and they chose Joe Biden, and Joe Biden turned around and then embraced much of the agenda of Bernie Sanders.
In fact, many of the people who worked for Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren are in positions throughout the administration making economic policy. Yeah,
and you look at the spending frenzy that created the inflation. You look at this ongoing battle to defy the law to provide a higher education bailout, which is what when you put these student loans on taxpayers, that's really what you're doing. You're bailing out colleges and universities, and you're saying you don't have to reform at all. You don't have to make any effort to make your degrees worth more so that people can finance them. You just go ahead, keep doing what you're doing, and it's all it's radical. That's what the Supreme Court said when they knocked it down the first time, and now he's sort of trying on the installment plan to do this huge transfer of wealth. So. It's hard to find a policy area where he's winning, and it's all, you mentioned the Supreme Court. I think the lawfare against Trump is a big part of how Democrats are making Trump more popular. That's one thing that really jumps out at you on this our recent Wall Street Journal poll is you tend to think of Donald Trump as being someone that people have a pretty fixed opinion about, love him or hate him, but he's actually becoming more popular. And the policy failure, I think, is part of it. But it's also, I think, just this sense that it's fundamentally unfair the way he's being targeted with law enforcement and judicial actions that are not fair.
Talk to me a little bit, too, about the changing coalition within the Democrats. I mean, they really, seems like they've lost the thread on keeping blue-collar workers. And now Hispanics and Black Americans also saying, actually, we're going to give Trump a chance. I mean, he went from like a 85% approval with Latinos to now 45%. Only 83% of people who voted for Biden last time say they will vote for him again. And if that turns out to be true, and the campaign hasn't obviously been enjoined yet, but it's on.
Yeah.
And we have a State of the Union coming up. You have the president losing all of these people to the point that Nate Cohn of the New York Times, when writing up the poll this weekend, said that Democrats might have to rethink their entire approach to the electorate.
Yeah, I think the embrace of left-wing cultural issues is a big part of that. I think that's what fueled some of the Trump rise in terms of bringing radical indoctrination into schools and so forth. But the one big irony of this election, we're talking about how Super Tuesday, nobody expects Biden to lose. He's expected to win big, even though, as we've just discussed, Democrats have been telling pollsters for a couple of years now they want an alternative. So I think maybe the answer to this is the point you raised, that maybe they haven't been given the alternatives that could peel off some of those blue-collar voters, younger voters, minority voters. We've had the only people who decided to challenge Joe Biden, Marianne Williamson, who's dropped out, who's kind of, speaking to a Bernie Sanders sort of fringe. You have Dean Phillips, pretty impressive guy, but business owner, certainly a moderate tone, and maybe he just wasn't the right person to peel away the vulnerable voters there.
The other thing that happened today is it Evan Osnos? Is that his name, from the New Yorker? He's a longtime reporter. He had about an hour with President Biden on January 17th.
Okay.
He hasn't written the piece yet. It's coming out soon.
Okay.
And apparently in this piece, he says Biden was fully compos mentis. Everything was great. And like, there was no problems, nothing like that. And it's interesting to me that interview would happen and he made no news. So like as a reporter, like on January 17th, there was a lot going on and he made no news. In the meantime, you do have Super Tuesday tomorrow where you have on the Republican side of things a real foregone conclusion that President Trump is going to sweep. Nikki Haley did win D.C.
Yeah.
I don't know. It actually, the Trump team was like, obviously she won D.C.
Yeah, I was going to say, they might have gotten their press release out before
exactly,
she did.
like, do you want to win D.C. if you're a Republican? But how much longer do you think she will stay in the race? Because she just announced a leadership team in Louisiana, but she apparently doesn't have any more ad buys that are underway.
Yeah, as far as I know, she doesn't have events scheduled after Tuesday. She's been spending her time this weekend in New England, Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine are holding Super Tuesday events. So if you're thinking maybe that's where she's looking to maybe pull off a surprise. She was in Utah last week, maybe where Donald Trump has never been especially popular. Maybe she breaks through there, but I think she's got to win a bunch. There's a perception that she can go to the convention if she's just determined to stay in it. But if she wants to actually have any more power than any other person at the convention, she needs to win some of these.
And also, do you want to be booed on stage?
Yeah, I'm not.
I don't think she does.
So I don't.
I admire her for so many reasons.
Yeah.
But at some point, you think, okay, and people have asked me, what is her long-term goal? I'm like, I actually don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't mind it because I actually think it's really healthy to have long open primaries where issues are debated. So I think it's great as a sort of, doing what I do. But in terms of her path, I think it doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless she can pull off a surprise here Tuesday.
That's right. All right. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. And we're back with Perino on politics. So the State of the Union happens on Thursday. This is a later State of the Union than usual. The Democrats have raised expectations so high for this speech for President Biden. I read a newsletter today where you had the author who definitely wants Biden to win say that Biden's performance must be flawless. Oh. There was a speechwriter for Bill Clinton who said, this is the most important State of the Union speech in the history of the country. And I thought, wow, guys, the one thing I learned from President Bush, one of the many things, but one of the most important things is lower expectations. Because the speech is going to be fine. It'll be on teleprompter. It'll be fine. He'll be energized for it. If he comes out of that speech and you're like, wow, he is fabulous. Okay, that'll be something. And then maybe that will help him a little bit. But wouldn't you lower expectations?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think maybe that's what they think they're trying to do, where sort of setting it up that if he doesn't stumble on his way to the lectern and he manages to read the speech, then they could pronounce it a great triumph. But I'm not sure that many people are going to be tuned in, and I don't know that it's really going to change someone's mind to see him read.
He should try to get Taylor Swift there.
Yeah,
because
that always
then
helps.
It's like with the Super Bowl,
Everyone would watch,
that added more. Maybe she will be. That'll be the surprise. They did a backgrounder last week from the White House talking about all the things they're going to discuss, and you'll hear the most accomplished president ever in the history of the country. And honestly, it's just hard to swallow that. You wrote about something last week that I wanted you to mention because I feel like a lot of their accomplishments are actually vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. And tell me about electric vehicles and especially electric buses and what's happened in communities all across America.
Yeah, there was this great spending surge. It was oddly, as you know, called the Inflation Reduction Act. And a lot of this is money funding a dream that we can transform our economy and wring fossil fuels out of it very quickly with a lot of aggressive government action and a lot of taxpayer dollars. And you're just seeing lately a lot of reality checks. And this particularly happens with, of course, electric buses. If the electricity is produced with fossil fuels, you haven't necessarily achieved much in terms of the climate. But the dream is that you'll have alternative fuels creating your electricity, and then the the vehicles running without gasoline, but they don't work. So this is a problem in northern climates, especially where you have buses are heavy. They carry a lot of people, and you need to heat them in the wintertime, which drains the battery. So this is kind of an interesting potential change, but you're seeing school districts not just in this country, but in Canada as well, who maybe they thought it was kind of a nice press release to say that
I got a discount.
Going green.
Right, like you get the green discount.
Yes, so there's a big government subsidy, but the buses are still very expensive relative to normal buses, and they have a lot of performance problems. They have a lot of problems getting a route done on one charge. And so
wow.
This seems like basic stuff, sort of things we take for granted. Wouldn't you want to make sure a vehicle was reliable before you filled it with children and started driving around a town? And I think the reality check economically is going to be, we saw the inflation that came from the spending binge. What we're going to see in the future years, and this is kind of a preview of it, is how little productivity-enhancing economic gains we're getting out of all this investment into alternative energy and various trendy projects that just don't work as well as stuff. I mean, there's this belief on the left that it's sort of an accident that we use oil. It's kind of an accident of history, and we just need to redirect things.
Like they wish it had never been invented.
Yeah, but it's not an accident. It's because you, in a barrel of oil, you have a highly concentrated form of energy, much more so than the sun or the wind, which is fortunately relatively mild and doesn't bake us or send us hurtling into the ocean.
So I want to talk about immigration because there was a piece 2 weeks ago that just made me want to scream. It was in, I think it was Axios or Politico, in which they report that early on in the Biden administration, they were determined to unravel anything President Trump had done on the border. So they started doing this, right? And they're taking it all down. And now you can see it on the chart. As they take down all of those barriers to entry, the number of migrants coming across goes up. And apparently, even when they realize that they might have some problems, both on a policy level and a political level, everybody at the White House was like, not it. Okay, they're the hot potato. Nobody wants to touch it. So they didn't do anything to fix it. What I wanted to ask you is when Biden gets up at the State of the Union and he tries to make the case that Republicans are to blame for the migrant crisis because if they wouldn't work on a bill that was going to be passed 3 weeks ago, that they abandoned that they're to blame for the last 3.5 years of migrant increases.
Yeah.
I know that the media will somewhat try to help them, the Democrats, to make this case. Are the Republicans prepared to push back on that? How effective will Biden be in making that argument?
Well, he's really losing on that issue. So maybe he doesn't need to get very far to help himself in this area. But the facts are pretty damning, as you say. This flurry of executive orders where he was quite explicit about wanting to end the Trump era.
93 executive orders.
Yeah, and some of them just kind of almost beyond belief. The one that gets me is the deportation moratorium he attempted. That was, I believe, a lawsuit from Texas Governor Abbott that ended that after a few months. But to say that we're as a policy for some period we don't want to enforce our laws. I mean, even someone who loves immigration as much as I do realizes this is nutty. You can't say, I've decided as a policy to show how kind and gentle we are, we're not going to have the rule of law for some period until the courts tell me I have to. So I think that's a very hard record to hide.
Well, one thing I've made a point, like even if the media tries to write it up that way, and they might have, and look, the bill did not get passed. I get that. I do feel that you have somebody on the Trump team that the Biden team does not want to mess with, and that is Chris LaCivita. He did the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth ads in 2004 against John Kerry.
Yeah.
And part of me feels like even if the media does help Biden try to make that argument, I think that the paid media, which is important, especially on the Republican side, because they have to make up for that deficit on the media side. Do you think Chris LaCivita can't make an ad that will stick in everybody's mind? I mean, look at we show video all day long with Bill Malugin and Griff Jenkins at the border going, oh, and 21,000 people have come in this month. Well, last month, February.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned the Swift boat example because that was a case where John Kerry was running for president, just assuming that most people had forgotten everything he said in the 1970s.
Right.
And that was an effective method of telling that history for many people who may have forgotten it, and many who weren't around and didn't know anything about it. This is a much tougher task. This is saying we'd like you to forget 2021 and 22 and really 23 until election season. We now have a new Joe Biden. I mean, just the absurdity of saying there's nothing he can do until he gets some new authority from Congress. After we all know the record of all the executive actions.
And it's likely that he will issue more executive orders so that night he can say, I just issued an order because the Republicans didn't. And I can imagine a lot of boos. The third issue, before we take a break, that Biden is sure to bring up, and Dr. Jill Biden this weekend was out there talking about it, is reproductive rights. And the person giving the Republican response to the State of the Union is the senator from Alabama, Katie Britt. Alabama is a place where the Alabama Supreme Court talked about personhood when it comes to embryos. And IVF clinics decided, we better just stop all of our IVF treatment, which I think was a definitely an overreaction. The support for IVF treatment is through the roof, like 90%. Biden is going to try to say that Trump and the Republicans want to take away all reproductive rights. I'm interested in how Katie Britt, who's young, fun, really accomplished young woman. I say she's young. I mean, she's got young children. I think she's just 40 or maybe around there. How she deals with that might give Republicans sort of a clue on how they can message it. But I don't know what she's going to say.
Yeah, I think that did hurt Republicans in 2022. Does it still have the same force this time around? Maybe the IVF issue, I kind of doubt that really goes very far.
Let me remind you of something, though, because you're old enough to remember, I believe.
Yeah.
Because you were I were there. This was also an issue in 2004. The stem cell issue.
Right, yes.
Remember? Even Nancy Reagan.
Yeah.
She looked at Christopher Reeve and said, if we had stem cell treatment, he would walk again. Promises to people that were not capable of being made or kept, or even made or kept. President Bush actually writes in Decision Points, Chapter 5 is about the stem cell decision and how he came to that decision. It's very interesting. It was right before 9/11. And that was really on people's minds at the time. And here we are still talking about a culture of life as technology improves. And if you are somebody who went through IVF and you have an embryo that you might want to bring to full term, and somebody goes into a clinic and destroys that embryo, what do you think happened to that embryo? What do you think happened to that? Right? Of course you're going to think that was my baby.
Yeah.
I know that some people might not think that way, but if you are going through IVF, all the emotional highs and lows with it, this just adds fuel to that fire.
It does. It's interesting. I think for the pro-life movement after Dobbs, it's challenging to figure out, obviously, how to manage the politics. And you probably look at an issue like this and you say, on the one hand, this is a very difficult political challenge. On the other, it's maybe the discussion that a lot of pro-life people want about, where does life begin? And what is the meaning of this? And what is the value of lives at different stakes or of the building blocks of life, I guess you might say.
And President Trump has floated the idea of a 15-week national ban. And I heard Dr. Jill Biden over the weekend. I believe she was in Wisconsin. And she said, do you think he'd really stop there? So even if President Trump actually means it, right? 15 they're going to say that they're never going to stop. And so this battle will be joined on that level too.
So I think if Trump is the nominee, he very well could end up landing at a spot that disappoints a lot of pro-life voters who have been justifiably enthusiastic given his term. But you say what you want about him. He's actually been very skillful
100%
at the politics of this issue. And I think back to 2016. I think it was actually the moment where a lot of conservatives decided they were going to vote for him was when he, in the debate with Hillary Clinton, unlike a lot of Republican politicians who kind of stumble around and try to think of something to say when the topic of abortion comes up, he managed to put her on the spot on, are you for ninth month up until the moment of birth? And I think so. He's got a track record and some skill, and I think maybe understands that most people have nuanced views of this.
He's very skillful, and I think maybe he'll land on the right answer. But I do think if you are somebody who believes life begins at conception, even 15 weeks is hard to swallow.
That's right. That's right. I think, I think you'd have to see it as, that's grubby politics. Long term, we have to change minds.
And it is interesting, and I know that there are people in the pro-life community who support the 15-week ban idea. But for me, I always remember, getting rid of Roe v. Wade as a faulty decision was to send it back to the states. Now the states are acting, so Alabama can do what it wants, but that doesn't mean Colorado has to do that. But now the Republican Party is saying, actually, let's have a national 15-week ban. And it's a little just hard to swallow. Yeah,
it is. I think it was a successful argument that this is not a federal issue, that the Constitution had not addressed it.
But showing how the Democrats have extreme positions to the ninth month, et cetera, might be the way that Republicans decide
also,
to
I wonder how, versus 22 going forward, how much of a motivator it is for Democrats if it becomes clear to voters for whom this is the most important issue, that it's not going away. It's going to be legal in various places at various times. And so I don't. That might sort of lose its political force when it kind of people realize it's actually not going away.
I didn't plan on bringing it up today. I wrote it down as we were talking, and it's just one of those things where it's going to have to be dealt with.
Yes.
In terms of an argument, there will be an argument, and you will see that. All right, we'll be right back with more Perino on Politics next. And welcome back to Perino on Politics. James, this is where I like to ask, what are my good friends, my smart friends, thinking about that I need to be paying more attention to?
Is one of them coming here soon? Let's hope.
So what's on your mind that you're paying attention to now at this stage in the cycle?
Well, I just been thinking about... there's been a fair amount of discussion on the Reagan legacy, and some people looking at what appears to be Nikki Haley's imminent defeat here. We'll see. Maybe she pulls something out on Super Tuesday, and there's some commentary that this is kind of the end of the Reagan era, the end of Reagan politics and the Republican Party and so forth. And as someone who looks at Reagan as the gold standard and treasures his legacy, I don't think that's true. Fortunately, I think
me too.
I think you see his enormous impact in our politics still. I think obviously the Trump style, the Trump rudeness, that is not Reagan. He's very gracious. Really generous toward opponents in a way.
He could cut somebody down with charm and a smile.
That's right. But I think one of the reasons you have such enthusiasm for Trump among Republicans is the record in many ways was Reagan-esque in terms of the really successful effort to restrain Washington regulators during the Trump era. The Trump corporate tax reform making the U.S. competitive around the world was, I would say, very much in the Reagan mold. And I think you'd have to say on judicial appointments, Trump was even more of a Reaganite than Reagan was. Yeah. They were really almost, I think maybe without exception, limited constitutional governance jurists. And so on the other side, I think the reason people think of Haley as sort of the end of the Reagan era is certainly a contrast with Trump on trade and immigration, those sorts of policies. But I think one of the reasons that Haley has not gotten more traction is I don't think she's really spoken to the Reagan voter in a compelling way. A lot of times her attacks on Trump are sort of similar to what Democrats or folks in the media make, and she kind of. And I understand she's often running in open primaries. She's looking for gettable votes, and they're often maybe in the center left more than on the right. But she's often attacking Biden and Trump as sort of similar, and they're both old guys, and they're both some people we should move on from.
But perhaps more significant on the end of the Reagan era, which I don't think it ends. I think it becomes more of like a part of the Republican coalition.
Right.
Sort of like there's always a libertarian streak, and a libertarian might end up voting for Republicans. I came from that sort of world in Wyoming and Colorado when I was growing up. But Mitch McConnell, who had some health problems over the last year, he's the Senate minority leader. He's been in office in that leadership position for 17 years. And unlike many people at his age in Washington, he said he's going to step down. But it wasn't just the age. I think that he saw the writing on the wall that support for him and his lack of support or endorsement for President Trump was something that he said, okay, I'm going to step aside now. So he will not run again for a leadership position. And I doubt he runs again for a re-election in 2026.
I wouldn't think so. I mean, given what he's done, I guess you never know. But he really was I think he's sort of the world's. I mean, from a conservative perspective, he's sort of the world's expert on stopping bad things from happening in Washington. Yep. So he wasn't. And I think in terms of pluses and minuses, he was. Not necessarily the person to sort of rally people to play offense or bring an issue to the forefront that wasn't already, but very successful in using the rules of the Senate to
look at the Supreme Court.
Well, yeah, I guess that's one place where he really played offense in terms of
even
helping,
during the Bush administration, when the Democrats wanted to take money away from the troops, they tried 17 times to hold that vote, and McConnell and Boehner protected the troops on those 17 votes. It was very effective. And then President Trump's tax cuts, it doesn't get through without Mitch McConnell. And then the Supreme Court, of which President Trump got that big victory today, largely because of Mitch McConnell. But he moves on, and I think you will see how he's treated tomorrow night. I do imagine that President Biden will make a big show of his love and support of Mitch McConnell, and perhaps President Trump will be watching who stands and applauds for Mitch McConnell. I hope that they all do. I mean, this is for comity would be a good thing. We'll see on that front. And then there's going to be the battle of who is the next GOP majority leader. But a lot of them wouldn't be senators without Mitch McConnell.
That's probably
huge
right.
Fundraising capability, indeed.
Yes.
All right, James, I have a quick question. Mm-hmm. It's multiple choice.
Okay, good.
Okay. Who was the last president not affiliated with either the Democratic or Republican parties? Was it Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Pierce, or Millard Fillmore?
Millard Fillmore.
Is it Millard? Millard, not Millard. Millard.
I'm gonna say. I think this is a trick question because I want to say Teddy Roosevelt, but I think he was still.
Yeah.
He went to the other party later. So I guess I'm going to say Fillmore.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
It is President Millard Fillmore, a member of the Whig Party, and that dissolved in 1854. It had a good run.
We hardly knew you.
Yeah. Thanks, Millard. We really appreciate it. Thank you, James.
Hey, thanks.
And where can people find you? Wall Street Journal editorial page and on Twitter.
That's right. Freeman WSJ on Twitter, and the best of the web column every day.
The best of the web column, which
WSJ.com.
When we were in the White House, we would print out the Best of the Web column every single day for President Bush.
That's right.
For him to read when Toronto was.
That's right. Many of us consider that the golden age of the column.
Let me say, I
when
think
James Toronto was writing it.
James,
the greatest.
I think you are still well read in Texas.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next week. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.